It was supposed to be a quick visit, just a moment to pay my respects at my grandmother's grave. The sun had already dipped below the horizon by the time I reached the cemetery gates, casting long shadows that danced eerily among the tombstones. I had lost track of time reminiscing and didn't realize how quickly night had fallen. As I stood to leave, a chill wind whispered through the trees, rustling the leaves and sending a shiver down my spine. I regretted not driving the walk home from St. Augustine's cemetery was a good mile through the woods. The path, though familiar, seemed sinister in the dark. The moonlight, filtered through the thick canopy, provided just enough light to see the trail but cast everything else in an inky blackness. My footsteps seemed unnaturally loud against the packed earth, the sound echoing in the still night. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I told myself it was just my imagination, the result of too many horror movies and ghost stories. But the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each step. I quickened my pace, eager to leave the cemetery behind. About halfway down the path, I heard a faint, distant sound that sent a jolt of fear through me. It was a soft, mournful wailing, almost like a child crying. I stopped, straining to hear better. The sound seemed to be coming from the cemetery, from somewhere among the tombstones. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. "Is someone there?" The wailing stopped abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence. I waited, my heart pounding, but heard nothing more. Shaking off the unease, I resumed my walk, now moving even faster. I hadn't gone far when I heard the sound again, this time closer. It was unmistakable, a low, mournful cry. Like someone in terrible pain, I turned, my eyes scanning the darkness, but saw nothing. The moon had slipped behind a cloud, plunging the woods into near total darkness. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice breaking. "This isn't funny." The crying ceased, and for a moment, all was silent. Then I heard footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate, crunching on the fallen leaves. I spun around, but there was no one there. The path was empty, yet the footsteps continued, growing louder, closer. Panic surged through me. I started running, my footsteps pounding against the earth. The path twisted and turned, and I stumbled over roots and rocks, barely keeping my balance. The footsteps behind me quickened, matching my pace, their rhythm relentless. I burst out of the woods into a small clearing, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The moon emerged from behind the clouds, casting a pale light over the scene. In the center of the clearing stood an old, decrepit mausoleum, its stone walls crumbling and overgrown with ivy. I had never seen it before, despite walking this path many times. It loomed before me, an ominous presence in the moonlight. I had no choice but to keep moving, my pursuer's footsteps echoing in my ears. As I approached the mausoleum, the air grew colder, and a sense of dread settled over me. The door was slightly ajar, a gaping black maw that seemed to beckon me inside. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to turn back, but the footsteps were almost upon me. I had to hide. I slipped through the door and into the mausoleum, the darkness swallowing me whole. The air inside was damp and musty, the smell of decay heavy in the air. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to quiet my breathing. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. I held my breath, straining to hear. There was a long, agonizing silence. Then the door creaked open wider. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the moonlight. It was tall and gaunt, its features hidden in shadow. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure didn't respond. It stepped inside, moving with a slow, deliberate grace. As it approached, I could make out more details. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over its bones, its eyes dark and hollow. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to obey. The figure stopped a few feet away, its empty eyes boring into mine. It raised a bony hand, pointing directly at me. "You shouldn't be here," it said, its voice a harsh whisper that echoed off the stone walls. I'm sorry," I stammered, my fear choking me. "I was just trying to get home." The figure tilted its head, as if considering my words. "This place is not for the living," it said. "Leave now and do not look back." I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted past the figure, out the door, and back onto the path. I ran without looking back, the sound of my own footsteps pounding in my ears. The woods seemed to close in around me, the trees whispering secrets in the wind. Finally, I saw the lights of my house through the trees. I burst out of the woods, stumbling up the porch steps and into the safety of my home. I slammed the door behind me, my heart racing. It took hours for the fear to subside, and even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. I never took that path again, and I avoided the cemetery at night. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the faint sound of footsteps outside my window, and I know that some things can never be left behind.